Senator Tom Cotton joins me. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
I'm doing well, Hugh. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, Mike Gallagher, Congressman extraordinaire, slandered your comms team this morning, blaming you for not distributing widely the plan to rebuild the Navy that evidently you worked on last year with a few members in the House.
Well, it probably would have gotten a lot more attention and been more well received if he hadn't been a co-author of it.
All right, thank you. That's all I needed. Senator, first of all, I do not know if you have a Tristan Kindle on your team or not, but she is briefing a bunch of Navy JOs today, and I hope she brings the message that an Army veteran does care about the Navy.
Yeah, Kristen is my national security advisor. She's a great aide and a brilliant young woman. She's actually been with me since she was an intern, worked her way all the way up to where she is now. She's also a Navy reservist and doing her reserve duty this year after 2 years ago being at the airport, being in and around the evacuation from the airport.
Have you read Kabul yet? The Untold Story of Biden's Fiasco and the American Warriors Who Fought to the End by Jerry Dunleavy and James Hassan?
Well, Hugh, if you'll turn your copy around to the back page, you'll see that I not only read it, but I recommended it on the jacket cover.
Oh, I never read blurbs, so there you are. You, Congressman Walton, Ben Shapiro. Okay, I never read blurbs. I got to tell you, it infuriates me. It infuriates me, and I wonder, have your colleagues read it?
I think most of them probably have not, especially the Democrats who like to forget that ignominious episode in our history. It kind of reveals the fact that no matter how bad you think Joe Biden's evacuation from Kabul was, it was actually much worse in reality.
They are not getting a lot of television time. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, the liberal media is acting like a phalanx of bodyguards around Joe Biden and this administration because they're afraid that the Republican nominee next year is going to defeat him. And they're closing ranks around him just like the way they did around him once he was the nominee in 2020. They don't want to carry any bad news for the administration.
I agree. The key, though, to this book and what I talked with Chairman Gallagher about is the last chapter is about how China has moved into the vacuum we left behind. I am not surprised by that, but today John Ellis puts a point into news items. The terrorism threat in Afghanistan is growing by the day. And the clock is ticking down, Senator, I'm convinced, to when we are hit again. Do you agree with me?
Well, unfortunately, I think the evacuation from Kabul and the collapse of Afghanistan and its falling back in the hands of the Taliban has substantially increased the likelihood that terrorism will emanate from that country again. That's not just my opinion or your opinion, Hugh. The commander of Central Command has testified to that in front of the Armed Services Committee. And at the time, Joe Biden was telling us, don't worry, we'll conduct over-the-horizon counterterrorism strikes. And I said at the time, and I was right then and right now, that it might as well be called over-the-rainbow strikes because they just simply were not going to happen without any actionable intelligence in a country that's landlocked and almost 1,000 miles away from the nearest Navy ship. And they haven't happened. There was one strike over the last 2 years. That was on Ayman al-Zawahiri. I'm glad that we killed him. He deserved to die. He was the leader of al-Qaeda after bin Laden, but I know the details that led up to that strike, and I can assure you they're not something that can be replicated, and that's why they haven't been replicated, and that's why terrorism is a growing threat in Afghanistan.
Because that is it. That's our over-the-rainbow capacity, was to take out Zawahiri, who was old and dying anyway. Senator, let me ask you about what I asked Chairman Gallagher and what I talked to Bret Baier about. Everybody and their brother gives Bret Baier the questions they think he ought to ask, and he nods and goes along. I don't do that. But if you were on the set tomorrow with Brett and Martha, what would you ask the 8 candidates who will be there if you had the opportunity to pose a question to them?
Hugh, I would focus on the most fundamental responsibility of the president, which is to keep the country safe as commander-in-chief, and the president we elect in November of 2024 will be president until at least January of 2029, which means he's going to be president for the 4 years in which China is most likely to go for the jugular in Taiwan. So I would ask them what they would do to stop that, and barring that, what would they do to roll it back? I think that's the most dangerous flashpoint in the world. So when it comes to the most fundamental responsibility of the president, I would encourage them to focus on that. Here at home, I think I'd focus on crime wave we have in our streets and the chaos at our border, and developing their concrete, specific, and actionable plans to stop that chaos and restore law and order both on our border and in our streets.
You know, Senator, I have urged the Republicans who talk to me not to say bad things about no labels. I don't want them to slam no labels because I think serious Democrats have to be given an option that's not the Republican. What do you think about no labels?
Well, Hugh, as someone who is pleased to carry the label of the Republican Party, and as you sometimes like to say, people who rose that party shouldn't disparage party, I'm pretty satisfied with the label of Republican, and I'd like to elect more Republicans, and I'd like to bring more people into the Republican Party. Now, all that said, I understand the Republican Party isn't the home for every American, and we need to reach out to those Americans who may not be comfortable with every part of our platform or our party's ideas and provide them reason to vote for Republicans over Democrats, even if they say don't want to register as a Republican and would never go to a Lincoln Day dinner or to a Republican county committee. So although I think labels can be pretty useful in politics, and like I said, I'm proud to be a Republican. At the same time, I understand that some of our fellow citizens, may not want to carry that label, and we still need their votes to win elections.
Yeah, I am a Republican for Republicans. I talk to Republicans about Republican politics. But I think the poor Democratic Party is broken, much more than we are. I mean, they always talk about how we're broken and a threat to democracy. Nonsense. They're broken because their left wing owns their party, and we need the Democratic Party to get serious. We got to get more Angus Kings. We got to get more. Who's the fellow who, the Democrat from Rhode Island who isn't nuts? Jack Reed. We need
Jack Reed.
Yeah, we need more Democrats like that who are serious, and no labels would give them a venue. Or am I wrong about that? Would it hurt Republicans more than Democrats?
Yeah, I think it's on. You have to look at it on a case-by-case, state-by-state basis. I just think that we should try to be reaching out to the broadest coalition of voters we can, and in some cases, you're going to be reaching out to people who still identify as Democrats. We still have in Arkansas cultural, ancestral Democrats, people who were raised when the state, as recently as 10 or 12 years ago, was still, kind of a one-party, well, I guess maybe at this point, 13 or 15 years ago, one-party Democratic state by and large. And they may not want to change parties, but at the same time, they recognize the Democratic Party at the national level has kind of gone off the deep end of left-wing ideology. Those are many of the people who came out to vote for Donald Trump for the first time in 2016. We need to keep them voting for Republicans and expand our reach to more voters like them.
Now, Senator, I mentioned Senators King and Reed as sort of serious independent Democrat, Angus caucuses with the Democrats. Is there any way that you can get 60 Senate votes for a Pentagon reform that would expedite the rebuild of the American military, the end of the politicization of it, and the restoration of confidence in its competency?
We can, Hugh. The last 2 years, we got more than 60 votes for a substantial increase in defense spending over what Joe Biden submitted as a budget. And he did that in part on purpose because he knew that Republicans would increase the defense budget and that there'd be a handful of Democrats like Jack Reed, like Angus King, like Jeanne Shaheen, like Joe Manchin, who though they may be very liberal in their domestic policy views, in my opinion, at least are more responsible when it comes to the nation's defense than, say, Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So we have done that in the past. To really do it effectively, though, Hugh, what we need is the majority. Because when we have the majority, we not only control what goes on the floor, we control the baseline debate in the committee. And when we have the majority, it's much easier to get those votes for serious legislation that will rebuild our military, that will eliminate the left-wing social engineering and experimentation, and get back to the basics of deterring war and winning war if necessary.
Do they understand, and we're talking about serious Democrats, that 800,000 civilians is too many and that the contracting system is broken and that we have to do something quickly? Is there any urgency on that side of the chamber?
I think some do, Hugh. That's the kind of thing that you're not going to get a lot of traction on when Democrats are in control, when they're writing the bill that we're then working off of, or that they're controlling the agenda. Look, why is Chuck Schumer out there blocking the FAA bill? It's because he's carrying water for unions. That's the same thing you'd see in the defense bill. But if Republicans are in control, if we win back the majority by electing people like Tim Sheehy in Montana, Jim Banks in Indiana, then we'll be able to set the terms of the debate and say, like, look, if you're not a rifleman on the front line or a pilot in a fighter aircraft, you're supporting those two people. And the further you are away from those two people, the harder it is to justify what you do in the Pentagon. A lot of important jobs there, both uniform and civilian. But if you're not doing one of those two jobs, you need to justify what you are doing in terms of what they're doing.
Senator, last question. I want you to check my work. David Weiss, the U.S. Attorney from Delaware, handling the Hunter Biden prosecution, now special counsel. Judge Norika, the district court judge that rejected the plea agreement. They are routinely described as Trump appointees. And I'm just railing about this because you do not get anyone appointed to the district court in a state or anyone appointed as a U.S. attorney in a state unless you have the Democrats on board. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Hugh. It's a longstanding custom in the Senate that no U.S. attorney and no district judge, no trial court judge, will move to a vote in the Senate unless you have the support of both senators from the home state. So although Donald Trump nominally submitted Mr. Weiss's name and Judge Norika's name to the Senate to be nominated, it couldn't have gone, neither one of those could have gone forward without the support of Chris Coons and Tom Carper, long time, decades long, personal friends and political allies of Joe Biden. It's just a fact that although Donald Trump nominated these people, they had to pass muster first with the Democratic senators from Delaware.
Senator Cotton, thank you. I hope somebody in the media notices that, because when you see Trump appointed, that's an attempt to suggest that they're somehow biased against Hunter Biden and for Donald Trump. They're not. They're not. They're professional. I get that. But I'm tired of that coverage. Senator Cotton, thank you. Don't go